It's 5 o'clock, so I'm going to call the work session to order. If everybody please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Chris will take the roll call.
Councilmember McIntyre.
Here.
Councilmember Hull.
Here.
Councilmember Pope. Councilmember Rowe.
Here.
Councilmember Galloway. Here. Mayor Johnson.
Here. Next item, do we have approval of today's agenda? Motion for approval?
So moved.
Second.
Councilmember McIntyre.
Here.
Councilmember Hull.
Yes.
Councilmember Rowe.
Yes.
Councilmember Galloway.
Yes.
This is the time when I would like to ask if anybody in the audience would like to speak on any of the items that are on today's agenda. Okay. And then the next thing today is to have Tim Oswald with Piper Sandler talk with the council on bond proceedings and the processes as it relates to the FY23 city budget. So I'm going to turn it over to Tim.
So in our discussion, I've already drawn a blank, a week or two ago, we talked about doing this session to kind of go over the list of projects and then also talk a little bit about bond structure. And so I brought some exhibits, all right if I hand them out for everybody.
Thank you. Need the overhead or anything? I guess not.
So the first page has got two sides to it, and this is the CIP plan that was sent to me, probably in late January, I would guess. And it's in the list of projects. Obviously, you can ignore FY21 and 22. Those years are now behind us, but 23 and 24 are on the right-hand side. And these are sorted by the building department, or the department of the city's budget, I should say. And if you flip it over to the backside and look at the very bottom, you'll see the number 7,938,000. So that's the list of projects. And I think I said at one point that I thought this was 1 year's capital plan. And I'm questioning whether that's actually accurate or whether the heading, which would suggest that it's actually 2 years, both 23 and 24 would be more appropriate.
Yeah, this was meant to be a 2-year cycle.
Okay. So that's my error. Sorry about that. So it's, if you took 7,000,009 and divided it in half and did a little rounding, you'll come up with 4 million for each year. So a little more in line with what I had expected. So there was some discussion about this whole essential and general purpose, and you held 7 different hearings the last meeting, and I would remind you that the statute defines essential and general. You define essential and general for purposes of your budget. these are your decisions, but the statute defines what they are for purposes of bond hearings and things. So the fact that the legislature said something is essential or general doesn't mean you have to view it that way. You can view it however you so choose. And so the table or that page that's there does not note the distinction between those that are essential and those that are general. There is a separate table that I didn't hand you that your lawyer prepared that has that kind of info on it. I don't consider that to be particularly relevant to today's discussion. The relevance of the essential and general is purely for purposes of the bond public hearing. From here, the relevance of essential or not is for you in your decision-making process. So what I had assumed is that you would bond for, let's round it and call it 8 million. And it would be the capital improvements for the year 23 and 24. And we can certainly do that. You've now held the hearing, and this is the list of projects that are on that hearing. And I think I think ultimately you all need to talk about these projects and make sure they're the ones you want to do. But the second page then that I put in front of you, I wanted to explain the math behind this. There's been.
Can I ask a question here before
Shoot.
we move on? The color coding on this, you have the blue and the green. Oh, sorry. Can you explain the color coding that's on this?
I don't actually know.
Perfect answer.
So-
All right.
The color
Yeah.
coding, is that
The blue,
all,
was that
is
you,
that
Phil?
equal this?
Yeah, from what it appears here, the ones in blue are the ones, oh, there is one more in there, isn't there?
On the second page, there's a couple of.
Yeah, I
items that
see that now that there's a couple that are not highlighted. Let's see, but there'll be one.
So the ones that are not highlighted are the ones that went through the fleet.
The one,
The ones that are not highlighted are the ones that went through the fleet. I was trying to make sure that all the budget numbers got in where they needed to be put in.
there's also another one. Oh, yeah, I got you. Okay, the fleet ones. Okay.
Because they were a different funding source, so.
Awesome. Thank you.
Doing okay? So the second page is the kind of what I wanted to focus some time on. And there's a front and back, and I apologize for pages full of numbers. It's kind of how I view the world. So let's walk through this page. At the top, it says general obligation bonds, and then there's a little blue line that says enter scenario. It's got a kind of peachish color stripe in it. Your existing bonds are in column 1, and that's the principal payments of those bonds. And that includes bonds that you pay from taxes, that you pay from local option sales tax. It includes the portion of bonds that were issued for your CSO improvement projects if they were issued as general obligation bonds. The next column, then the peachish colored, which highlights this issue, is the 8 million 2022 bond. And again, these are principal payments. And the way I had contemplated this schedule would be a large payment in 23 and then nothing, and then smaller payments in 2030 through 2038. I'll get to why in a minute. So I know you're going to want to ask that question answered. I will answer that. What I'm solving for ultimately is over on the far right is the tax rate. You've indicated that you want the levy rate to be $4.29. So that's what we're shooting for. And yes, this table shows that levy at 454. That's something we will resolve before you sell the bonds coming up. But as you look at the payments, then 23's payment and then 24's payment drops, and then 25's payment drops again. That's intentional. It was your intention that the future years' debt payments would decline so that you could do new capital in future years within the confines of the levy rate. Does that make sense? For purposes of this exhibit, I assume that the property value won't go up. So the 679 million is the current taxable value of the city. We assume that will stay the same throughout. There's a column number 10, abatements, and let me explain. Abatements are sources of payment of bonds other than property taxes. So the most common one in Ottumwa would be the use of TIF and then the use of the local option sales tax. Those are the two fairly common sources of money other than property taxes that you use to pay bonds. So we track those alternate payments, based on each individual bond series. Does that make sense? Okay, what does this tell you? Well, I showed you the proposed payment schedule, but let's go back to the why this schedule. And if you would turn the page over, again, a page full of numbers. Working across from the top, so this is basically a cash flow of all of your debt and the proposed future debt of the city. And property values are the first thing running across the top. Your tax levy rate, and then the total dollars is X times Y. $679 million property value at $4.29 produces 2.9 million of tax revenue. Do you see those numbers? And then you can scan across to the right from there. And in this exercise, in this table, I assume that the property value would grow 0.6% a year. So less than 1%. Below that then are the existing bonds of the city and presented by their series. And if I knew what the purpose was, I listed it. So you see Beach referenced there in a couple of instances. You've got bonds outstanding 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, and 2 issues from 2021. And if there's so the payments run across by fiscal year, and then if there's an alternate revenue source to pay that bond, they're presented below the payment is a negative number. So for example, if you go to the one that says 2020 sewer bond, and you look at FY22, you'll see that the bond payment is $1,395,000. And then below that, you'll see that the sewer fund pays $388,000 of that. This local option sales tax pays $526,000, and the Westgate TIF pays $480,000. And when you add those three up, the taxpayers are paying zero principal and interest on that bond. Do you see that? And if you scan across on that one, you'll see that is the case. That was the 2020 bond was issued for sewer separation project, and it was your intention at the time that the taxpayers were not going to pay any portion as part of their property tax bill for that project. So we allocated it to Westgate, to Lost, and to the sanitary sewer fund. Separately, I should point out, we have cash flows going for Westgate, and we have cash flows going for the sewer fund and for the local option tax fund to make sure that those funds can support the bond payments. These numbers aren't just necessarily made up. There is some magic going on also elsewhere. Then what I've got is the, and I colored them yellow, future bonds. And I, for purposes of this exercise, I chose to assume that you would need $4 million annually for each year into the future. So then there's your total debt payments, and then those are offset by local option sales tax, TIF, and in the old days, the backfill, which we're assuming won't have any income into the future. And then all I'm doing is running a cash flow at the very bottom to make sure that the capital improvement project fund is positive. And yes, I do see there's a couple of spots here and there where it's slightly negative, and we'll have to address those as we get to some of those years. But my purpose of showing this table to you, there was this question about, are we selling 20-year bonds every year for X dollars? And I want you to understand the goal had been, the plan Keela and I had developed maybe a year and a half or so ago, was that you would sell a bond for capital in 1 year and pay it off in the next. And I mentioned that a little bit the other day. Let's keep the interest cost to a minimum. Let's keep the professional fees to a minimum. Let's make this as efficient as we possibly can, recognizing that you kind of have to sell bonds in order to generate the capital you need for your projects. Let's make this as cheap as we possibly can. So that is the plan, is to have the payments be bonds issued in a year and paid off the following year. Doing okay so far? Everybody following? Any questions about that goal? Okay, so that takes us back. So I think what I'm hoping you'll take away tonight is that, including the issue that you're talking about now, you have the ability to take on $4 million of capital improvements each year into the future, issue the bond, pay it off, issue the bond, pay it off, issue the bond, pay it off. That the actions we took last year and the action we would take this year with this year's bond will set it up so that all future bonds can be issued and paid off, within 1 year. And I'm hoping that you'll find that acceptable, I guess. But maybe I should pause there and let you ask questions or comments.
Can you just clarify, because I know we're live but can you clarify what the benefit to that is? Just for us new council people too, and the community in general?
Sure. So if you take let's say $4 million issue, and current interest rates are, let's make up a number, 2%. So that's $80,000 a year of interest cost. If you stretch that $4 million issue and pay it off over 20 years, what is that? That's $800,000, $900,000 of interest cost over that 20-year period. It's not an exact calc because you do make payments each year along the way. Add to that transactional costs. Selling a bond is, $4 million issue probably costs you $75,000 to $90,000 of upfront fees. So add those two together, and a 20-year payoff on a $4 million bond is maybe just a hair under $1 million of interest and fees. If you do that every year, that's real money, right? And my logic is, well, if you need $4 million every year, then why in the world would you pay one of them off over 10 years, 20 years, take on another one the following year, pay it off over 20 years, and then the third year and the fourth year, just levy $4 million of taxes and be done with it. And quit paying interest costs and quit paying professionals. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
So the answer, I sort of answered on this. Why would we structure a bond today where we make no payments we make a big payment in the first year and no payments in the next few years? And my answer is, it's not perfect. I recognize that. But if you my goal is to get the city to where next year you borrow money and you pay it off in a year. The year after that, you borrow money and you pay it off in a year. And you can do that within the tax rate goal that the council has, which again, $4.29. And if we put payments in some of those years, 2024 through 2030, we may not be able to take on 4 million each year of capital. Might have to be 3.5 million or so. And I think one of the messages that I had understood is we'd really like to have about 4 million each year available for capital improvements. So I'm trying to balance. I recognize that this issue does have one large payment and then a few payments out in future years. And as such, will have an interest cost tied to it. That goal was primarily to allow you to be able to have access to 4 million each year going forward. Now, the one thing I would point out is that this goes back to the discussion we started with, that's a 2-year capital plan. I assumed it was, when I built this, I assumed it was a 1-year capital plan of 8 million, and then next year is 4. So we can probably tinker with the payment schedule, shorten it up a little bit or something else in order to try and remove some of the interest costs, since as a practical reality, you won't need to borrow for FY24. You'll have already borrowed the money. Now, does that make sense to people?
Quick question on your bond rates and interest costs. Are those based on what you have for those rates at this point in time, or is there any sort of forward looking on what you think the market might do over the next few months, years, whatever?
So I'm smiling. So the easy one first. The existing bonds are based on the rates on the existing bonds, and so that's baked in. The bonds that are proposed for right now, I'm using current market rates, not. And then for going forward purposes, assuming a flat assumption of that we'll pay 2%. So 2%. Sorry. I like you. I don't know where rates are actually going, up, down, sideways. The goal of this exercise in my mind is to take advantage of the relatively low rates that are available today, lock them in, and set yourself up so that you can do this kind of pay-as-you-go bond plan into the future.
I don't know if there's any other general questions about the bonding process or anything for Tim, or if there's specific questions about any of the items that are on the list anyone wanted to talk about.
So just just for clarification, this keeps our debt load pretty much where it sits currently by using this methodology.
Correct.
Yep.
Correct.
And it is built into the budget that will be presented for the public hearing and potential adoption next Tuesday night, with the $4.29 or 4.295 a rate. That these projects are built into that, should the council decide to proceed with the bonding and with the budget. Looking at, I know you've had different views of the projects and how they are grouped by the different hearings that we had to have. This table that Tim handed out by department or project description. Another way of looking at it is the type of project it is, or what the dollars will be used for. And I looked at out of the projects we have, about 5 of them were for building maintenance or repairs at a little over $1 million. That's about 12.7% of the requested dollars. They had 75,000 for equipment, just under 1%. 1.45 million for parks projects. 325,000 for public works projects. It's 4%. Technology and technology-related software, 291,000. Vehicle replacement, 1.7 million, which is about 22%. No, I didn't hand this out. I calculated and grouped things. The other thing is the development projects. So this was a lot of the things that we had that were listed in there. And most of them probably be under the building code enforcement, dilapidated building program, roof facade grants, the depot, the McTumma homes, all of those types of things like grouped as development. That's just a little over $3 million, or 38% of the total request is reinvestment back into the community. So whereas a lot of this is replacement of infrastructure, of buildings, of vehicles, there's 38% or almost 4/10 of it is putting it right back in the community to help build the values, to help encourage that and lower our level of taxes overall.
Well, and to clarify too, this all follows the 2040 comprehensive plan too, helps build us and get us closer there, correct?
Correct. So as far as process for new council members and for the public, it was mentioned, Tina had mentioned that the ones that were highlighted on the one sheet that Tim had handed out here, we have a fleet committee, staff level fleet committee, and they review all requests that come from all the departments. And they do a pretty thorough job of investigating the needs of vehicle replacements, the things that can be repaired, replaced, help to move a vehicle along another year or two if able to. And they have a pretty good eye of when something is going to start nickel and diming the budget and recommending those for replacement at that time. And so typically the ones that get to this level have been vetted through that process and are in need of replacement or repair. There's a couple other projects that were in here that had been before the council at different times for consideration. The CAD dispatch software program, tennis courts, indoor sports complex had been before but hasn't been voted up or down yet. So these are all kind of projects that have been gone through various stages of review and recommendation and have been brought forward before the council for you to consider. I know there's a number of staff are here. If there's any specific questions or anything for projects that are listed there that you want more information on.
What's the Walsh School?
That is, go ahead, Zach.
So that's a project where there is no funding in the bond. That's the one that's red. And that is we had looked at doing some of the engineering work and some things for a housing subdivision there. And if we do pursue that project, we'll look at other sources of funding.
What's the $10,000 for the North Courthouse?
That was for painting and restoration of the cemetery rental property that's on North Court.
Okay.
That is a rental property in terms of revenue, and so there's some repair and painting and things like that that need to be done, and they'll be able to re-rent that out.
And just looking forward into the future, into the next budget cycle, I know that we still have, after we replace this one fire engine that we do have slated for this year, it's my understanding that we still have one that's going to be cycling out after that. Is that correct, Chief?
Yeah, that's the tentative plan. We had 3 trucks that were in horrible shape. We replaced one last year. We got one ordered right now, and then another one will be in the next 2 or 3 years.
Okay. So is that something that, and I know that this is probably way too prematurely to be talking about that. Is that something we're going to consider the next budget cycle or the cycle after that?
Yeah, so we'll continue to build out these capital plans, working with fleet committee, working just in general terms of identifying replacement needs and schedules, as the stuff comes up, trying to get on a better basis for that along the lines of what Tim was mentioning there. If we're looking at, we've got $4 million of capital to play with every year, where are those dollars going? So we can get on a good replacement schedule for that. So I'd say if it's not the next, and you said within the next couple of years that needs to be replaced, we're definitely gonna have to be planning for that.
And then the historic preservation plan, that is the matching, like to match it, correct? It's not the full plan.
So that would fund up to $20,000 for a plan. I actually have no idea what a plan like that costs. Can't find cities that have done comparable things to what our commission wants to do. But we're going to go out and search, and then we're going to pursue a certified local government grant to cover the rest. That would be used as match then for that, unless it happens to be $20,000 for a plan.
Any other questions for Tim or any of the department heads that are here?
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. On here is community development, like the handicap accessible playground. I think, and I know that we don't have it in the budget now, but I really like that idea, and I think that's definitely something we should be considering in future budgets.
If there's no other comments, really appreciate you, Tim, for coming down to meet with us again today to answer any questions that the council has. This is pretty new stuff to most of us up here this year. Mark obviously has had some history with this, but I found it very helpful last week and today, so thank you very much.
Do we need next steps?
Next steps.
Okay, so I think I mentioned last time that I just penciled out a timeline, start to finish, and didn't think through, council process or anything else when I penciled that out. Next step at this point, you've held the hearing, you'll approve the budget. There's an action item where you'll approve the bond official statement, and that's the next action item. I think I had originally had that on for your meeting next week. That's probably premature at this point by a couple weeks, so I'll probably bring that back to you if it's okay for your first meeting in April. And then if you're ready with this list, then I'll keep plodding forward. So we would sell the bonds at probably the second meeting of April or the first meeting in May. I'll want to look at who else is selling bonds so that we're not trying to get in the market and compete with somebody else that's selling similar bonds to us. Minor issue, but I'll want to look at that before I commit to a specific day. But let's assume that'll be probably the first meeting in May. Have the bonds interest rates locked up and have money in your hands before the close of the fiscal year.
And Phil, just to clarify, so we'll want to, we have to approve our ARPA funding soon too, because I know some of these kind of overlap. So would we do that before we approve the bonds? Or does it matter timeline, I guess, for either of you?
Well, so we need to approve the ARP funds before the end of the month. It'll be, we've got one more person that's going to come before us at next Tuesday's meeting. And I was thinking on the 22nd, depending on how that goes, having a recommendation for the council. We got a special work session that day, having this as an item on that to approve, officially approve by resolution, the ARP funds for this year. There are, as you mentioned, a number of things that could be spent in either area. Now, one of the things that is in the bonding here is for the HVAC for this building, and that was maxed out at that $700,000. The ARP funding can be used for the HVAC parts of this building. And so if we're able to approve or agree to approve the other items out of the bonding and not out of the ARPA funds, then that would free those dollars up for the City Hall project. So that'd be a loose recommendation that I would have.
And when you say the City Hall project, do you mean HVAC and restoration or just the HVAC?
Well, there aren't enough funds in the ARP to cover the HVAC and restoration.
So I want to ask the question to the rest of the council. Should we vote on or decide on the ARPA money first, or should we approve this first and then go back to ARPA?
We have to have the ARPA funds approved by the end of the month. And then this is all, would you say, April, second meeting of April? So,
But
right.
I think I think what Doug's saying is that we need to have the conversation of, like to Phil's point, if we want to get the HVAC done in this building, which I think is very important, then we need to discuss where is that going to come from, if we're going for that. So to Doug's point, I think we do need to have a conversation and maybe that comes on the 22nd or next week. I don't know when you're having that, but we need to have the conversation of, are we going to look at using these other projects through, bonding and then do ARPA for that. So I think it all comes together. It all coincides.
So essentially what Tim would need to know is what is the total dollar amount that we're moving forward with? And if there are certain projects we're not going to include in the bond request, that's what you would need to know, I assume, right?
Correct.
So if we were going to say some of these projects we're not going to bond for, we're going to use the Recovery Plan Act money for instead, then we would remove it from the bond. That would give him a different number to base everything off of. So in a way, it's it's a whole chicken and egg, but one does hold the other's hand.
Well, and you bring up the City Hall HVAC because we can only bond up to 700,000, correct?
For this project, yes, that's without going to a special referendum for a larger amount.
Correct.
So that would be the legal requirement. And that's where he's talking about the general corporate purpose versus the essential corporate purpose. So the building improvements are under the general corporate purpose, and that's the $700,000 threshold, which is in this request. So anything above that, we'd be looking to use other funding for. And that was why I think a lot of these projects were included into the bonding, because that gave us the opportunity to still do those projects while at the same time reserving other dollars for the City Hall renovation, or the HVAC aspect of it, I should say.
Do you have a dollar amount for the HVAC?
The estimate was 2.2 million for the HVAC project. The renovation was another 3 million. So 5.2 total. And so the 700,000 was what we could borrow for this, for the HVAC aspect of that. And that leaves 1.5 million of balance, roughly speaking.
I'd like to have a meeting to discuss the ARPA funds and what we're going to do as a council to spend, probably before we put Tim on hold, because we really can't, because it may be a different number when we get done, but we got to have the meeting in order to be able to give Tim a correct number.
So, and that's what you're talking about is the 22nd, Phil, is that discussion of the ARPA funding? Because we have one more presenter next week, correct?
Right. So right now, the way I had envisioned it, recommendation that I would have made would be to take the lost revenue due to COVID, it was about $560,000 off the top of that. And then the balance to go towards the City Hall project, less anything that the city wanted to give towards whatsoever you do after the presentation for the first year here. And unless anything that you wanted to strip out of the bonding here that we would need to bond for to do those projects. So looking optimistically, if the council were to approve the projects as laid out, as presented, that are funded through the next year's budget, then these projects would stand. Those would not have to come out of the ARP funds. That would leave those available for the City Hall project, the revenue recovery, and the other project whatsoever you do, if desired.
Okay, so we get, oh, sorry, Mark, go ahead.
So just going off of one of the projects you just mentioned there, if that is going to be, on the docket, I think we do need to have further discussion, because I think that the money can be utilized in better ways than something that we haven't seen a plan for, and there's no record of sustainability with the plan. It's just my 2 cents.
And I think they're planning on bringing that to the last conversation when they present.
I think there are other issues at stake with that also, though.
Just going back, so we get 1.8 million this first year, correct?
Yes.
So then you said 560,000 for the lost revenue, 1.5 million, right, for the HVAC?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it'd be more than what was available. Yeah. I'm sorry, and the shower house is in there too. I forgot about that. There's 300,000 for the shower house. Those would be the three projects, or three items that I'd recommend. Fourth one would be, depending on the presentation next week.
And then we also have another, 1.8 coming in the next year too. So any of these projects that we say, okay, we're not going to fund. So for example, Mark, you're concerned with, that you just addressed, that could always come back in a year, correct?
And that was a thought with one of these other ones on here, the cemetery office shop building, that one isn't ready currently for this year. So that one would be held to a future year. And that's only my recommendation that I would be looking ahead. And again, that all depends on what the council wanted to keep or remove from the bond issue here. There are a number of these projects that were identified in both. And so if they're bonded for, we don't need to use the ARP funds for those.
A quick question. So when I look at this on, so I go down to the parks and I see shower house, and then it looks like in FY 2022 right now. So it's already there. It's not in the 2020 or 23-24 budget. So is that what you're talking about for ARPA funding?
Yeah, so he had $250,000 was set aside towards the shower house. There's some other dollars that were received for grants and other things. The total project is estimated to be over $600,000 for that. So that balance is what I'm talking about, covering out of the ARP funds, because we did not bond additional dollars for that.
Okay, so that would complete the project then if we were to give the
Correct.
300,000. Okay.
Correct.
Sorry, one last question. So the 750,000 for the tennis courts, this would be considered by the state a essential project, correct?
So
Where it can go over the bond amount of
It
700?
was identified as an essential corporate purpose project because it's in an existing park. It's an improvement within an existing park. So it qualifies under that qualification. Again, this is, as Tim said, essential in general. It doesn't mean that one project is more valuable than another. Those are terms as far as the legal terms that are used for that. Yeah.
Any other questions, comments? Are we done with the bonding process? Okay, the next item on the agenda is to ask the public if anyone has any agenda items they would like to bring up and present to the council that are not on tonight's agenda. Okay. The next item is for a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Chris will take the roll.
Councilmember McIntyre,
Yes.
Councilmember Hull,
Yes.
Councilmember Pope,
Yes.
Councilmember Rowe,
Yes.
Councilmember Galloway.
Yes.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.